The Wargame series has always been about deck building. For a lot of us, most of the time, it's just spent in the armory trying out new deck and unit combinations. And it's the main feature that makes Wargame different from other real-time strategy games on the market. The only other game that is really comparable is Total War Multiplayer, but Wargame does allow you to bring up reinforcements, while Total War Multiplayer only has the units you bring up are the units you get. So today I want to take a trip down memory lane and see just how the deck building aspect of the game has changed since the beginning. So to start off with, we got European Escalation, the entry to the Wargame franchise. And I have to say it's quite different from what deck building is today. The main reason is that you only have two choices, NATO or Pact, when selecting your deck. No national decks, type decks, no nothing. It's very limited in terms of options, and more so when we get to units. Because in European Escalation, each faction deck was just 4 countries, US, UK, Germany and France for NATO, and East Germany, USSR, Czechoslovakia and Poland for Pact. You could view all these countries as just one big country, as there are no penalties or reasons to exclude a country from your deck, unless you're trying to roleplay. For example, you could play a US only deck rather well, as they have good units under every category. But if you tried playing a UK deck, well, enjoy not having any actual AA units under your support section. All you have is artillery. So European Escalation made you rely on all the countries put together to make a competitive deck for online play. Also, deck layout was much more simpler. You had 25 activation points and each card only cost 1 point. The max slots per category was 5 with 7 categories available. That gives you 45 total slots, with only 25 of those being filled. This was a lot less restrictive, especially when you consider that when you get a card, it's not just a singular unit, but an entire line of a said vehicle franchise. So with only 1 activation slot, you could have a Leopard 2, 2A1 and 2A4 available to you on the battlefield. And that's not including the MPT-70 and KPT-70 that you have under 1 card, the Ceradon and M8 AGS you have under 1 card, and the MX-30B to the B2 series, etc, etc. You could have an awful lot of units in a deck, so it was very easy to fill out all the rows needed on the battlefield, and you, or your opponent, never really had to worry about running out of units. As well, you had to unlock each unit by either playing online or the campaign. You got stars for leveling up. Use stars to unlock new units to put in your deck and expand it. This made playing online very bloody annoying for new players, as your strongest tank available, for example a T-72B, won't exactly trade rail against a shiny M1A1 Abrams behind an unlock paywall. For campaign it made sense because you get slowly introduced to the newer, more advanced units that help you introduce you to new concepts of the game, such as flamethrower tanks, or high-end helicopters, or high-end heavy tanks. But for online it was an absolute disaster, because if you wanted a fair fight, your best bet was to play single player, or trudge through some online matches for a few hours till you can unlock those essential units. A few other notable differences is that IFVs and APCs that carry infantry could be brought separately without any infantry inside of them. These ranged from useful through M2A2 Bradleys with autocannons and tow missiles to useless with M113s with only a 50 cal machine guns. And honestly, the stats page looks straight out of a Microsoft Excel document. Overall, I want to say EE was a rather dark time in terms of deck building. It's only worthwhile to have one type of deck for either faction, as you just unlock the best units and throw them in together. There's no need for multiple deck types for different scenarios and playstyles, as one deck fit every single role effectively. Seriously, you could have every model of Soviet tank from the T-55 all the way to the T-80U in your deck, which totals up to 236 tanks. I don't want to say that the game wasn't tactical though, as you still had to play smart to win matches. You could not just throw all your high-end units on the first move to win like a pay-to-win game, but making a deck was much more simpler, and you either had the right units or the wrong units There was no in-between or trade-off. And with that, that takes us off into the sky with Airland Battle, where things took a drastic 180-degree turn. First off, you did not have to unlock units now. Everything from the get-go was available with no need to unlock any bloody stars. They originally were going to have stars in the game, but they changed their mind during the beta, thank God, giving everyone an equal playing field and removing their "I don't have any heavy tanks, this is not fair" attitude. Secondly, activation points were a lot less abundant. Each base deck had 8 categories with 9 slots each, so a total of 71 slots, but each slot had diminishing returns. The more helicopter cards you had, the more it cost for the next heli card, and now it was 1 unit type per slot, so no every type of TA to you for 1 point. So it really made you think what you could afford. For example, I could remove a plane card to afford another tank card and vehicle card. It definitely made you reason what was needed, as planes and helicopters, very valuable and powerful units, would end up costing more per card than say vehicles or infantry. Thirdly, there was actual different deck types. You could still play an entire faction under a general deck, or you could play a single country. You even had type decks limiting you to specific unit styles, such as armoured based units only or airborne based units, and you could even have year restrictions restricting you to a time period. Now, it may sound silly to limit yourself in this way, but everything had a trade-off. For limiting yourself to a nation, type or year restricted decks, you got bonuses such as more units per card, more activation points, and XP bonus for specific types of units. But you had a less overall unit selection available. Well, kind of. With the introduction of prototype units to Airland Battle, which made sure you could only get them with their specific nation, definitely made it worthwhile to play national decks. For example, Canada's prototype units are the ADATs, Chimera, Highlanders or Scary Guys of Eric's, M103 TUA, and Javelin Squads. So if you played a Canada deck, you would have very heavily armoured tanks, good short-range ATGM infantry and long-range ATGM vehicles, as well one of the best AA units in game with a useful Javelin AA supporting them. But you had no helicopters, plane selection was rather limited, and have fun with no cannon-based anti-aircraft units. It made playing each national deck a trade-off. You had your pros and you had your cons, and this went even further with type and year restriction decks. But when it came down to it, if you wanted to win, it was still the best idea to either go General Bluefall or Redfall faction decks. General Bluefall, for example, just had a huge selection of units available between 8 countries, that even if one OP unit run reek was nerfed, there was another unit that could theoretically take its place. And even though you only had 33 activation points, you could still get all the most needed units to fill out all the rows, and having access to a wide unit selection was worth the loss of not having access to a few fancy prototypes. You still had the Leo 2A4 for your heavy armour, and other power units and whatnot in general decks, but sometimes the cheaper units could be used far more effectively, such as the SK-60B or AH-1F Cobra attack helicopter. And it was the same deal for Redfall. It could be argued that going USSR only was more worthwhile in a general deck, but that's another video. I also want to point out that general mechanized and motorized decks were rather commonplace during this meta, as infantry are very important and the whole unit selection really just comes under the same logic. So in the end of the day, if you play just to win, you still made your deck like in European Escalation, with a right unit selection, but with just less units in a deck. Overall, Airland Battle was a step in the right direction. I remember spending hours just fiddling with decks to see what would work and what would not, making fun Vietnam style decks or 1982 Falkland deck. National decks were fun and more viable compared to European Escalation, and honestly possible. UK now actually had some AA units, but they were just not worth it if you wanted to win. And finally we get to the big Red Dragon. From Airland Battle to Red Dragon, there's not as many drastic changes from European Escalation to Airland Battle, but there was enough to make quite a big difference. The main one was coalition decks, which helped bridge the gap between national decks and general decks. They had access to 2 or 3 countries' full arsenals, prototype units as well, which gave players a nice middle ground between unit selection and activation points which they've been striving for since Airland Battle. Now if you wanted to play a Canada deck, you may as well just go a USA-Canada NORAD coalition, as the US can help fill out the helicopter and tank gap that Canada has, and Canada can contribute with infantry and their ADAT AA piece. It definitely made coalition decks feel more like a potluck dinner in an all-you-can-eat buffet, but at the same time it does make national decks obsolete, as once again, unit choice from a coalition deck does trump activation points from a national deck. And secondly, each base deck now has only 5 activation slots per category for a total of 40 slots. We're not going to be counting naval, as that section is all completely free, and rail it's naval combat. This is not a huge deal for some categories, as planes and helicopters cost a boatload towards 4th and 5th slot, but compared to Airland Battle, your infantry selection is now a bit more lower. It is quite common in Airland Battle to have decks with 7 to 9 infantry cards, because rail infantry are the mainstay of the game. Instead, if you want to increase your slots for deck, you got to go into a type-specific deck. And like with Airland Battle, the 2 major types you really want to pick are either Mechanized and Motorized, because once again, you get more infantry. I have seen quite a few armoured decks that can prove to be rather useful. And with these 2 changes, the current meta, as the video is uploaded, are coalition decks such as the Commonwealth, Eastern Bloc, Eurocorps, etc. are the mainstay decks to go, due to the fact you have that nice balance between activation points and unit variety. So general decks have pretty much been made completely obsolete by now. Overall, deck building throughout Wargame has made quite a lot of major changes since, well, European Escalation, each iteration improving on the other. From My-Ray, the High Ray, to Oslo, all the units availability to European Escalation, to let's all just be a general deck because we got everything available that's useful, from Airland Battle to let's all just work together and stick with our own little groups of coalition decks of Red Dragon. Right now I'm very happy with how deck building is done, especially with how coalition decks are built, because there's so many good combination and units, and each coalition deck isn't exactly extremely powerful in every single area. Each of them lack in certain aspects, so picking and choosing between the other, depending on your playstyle and what you want to fill in for the match, definitely adds a bit of tactical complexity into the game, instead of just having everything on not, because I honestly believe that having these restrictions limited to your pros and your cons in the deck make Wargame a lot more exciting. And honestly, I'm looking forward to what could be improved on in the deck building in Wargame 4 when it comes out. Please, Eugene.